Good afternoon. I'm going to bring the March 21st meeting of the Poverty and Homeless Board Executive Committee together. Dan Bryant is arriving. Hello, Dan. So why don't we go around the table and begin? We'll just introduce ourselves. So when do you guys want to start down there, Amanda?
Amanda Porter, Lane County staff. Melissa Coloma, Lane County staff.
Sean Mann Gordon, Springfield City Council.
Steve Manella, Lane County Human Services Manager.
Pat Walsh with Vox Public Relations.
Dan Bryant, First Christian Church.
Pat Farr, Board of County Commissioners.
Chris McAllister, former homeless adult.
Lacey Henry, youth representative.
Brian Aldridge, Lane County staff.
Great. Welcome. I'm glad you're all here today. Why don't we take a look at the agenda? Is there anything that needs to be added to this? Go ahead.
I was going to say, the audience, do you want to introduce them, or
No,
your call, you're the chair.
Yeah, we're going to go for it. So anything need to be added to the agenda or anything? Or any comments on the agenda? If not, that's great. Let's go to the consent agenda. Any comments, corrections, or anything regarding the minutes from the January 17th Executive Committee meeting? Or anything regarding the financials? If not, can I get a motion?
I'll make a motion to accept the minutes.
Great, second.
I second.
All in favor, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed, say aye. No. Okay, great, thanks. So let's move on to committee work group updates. Commissioner Farr, is there anything you'd like to share regarding shelter and supportive housing?
The Shelter and Supportive Housing Committee was scheduled to meet on Monday of this week. We will be rescheduling that meeting. We didn't meet this week.
Sure.
So our ongoing agenda continues.
Okay, great. Thank you. Chris, League.
League is currently reviewing its work plan, where we were with our work last year and where we want to go with this year. And one of the things that we're really highlighting is bathroom access and sanitation. We're in a public building right now, and we have a locked door to the bathroom. So something to consider. Thank you.
A locked door, what?
Can't use the bathroom in a public building unless you have the right code, and the code doesn't always work. And so we have public access. We have people coming into public buildings. We want them to access services. We need to make sure they have a safe place to use the bathroom. If we can't get in and we're supposed to be here, what about the people who are stuck in the lobby? So just saying, we need more public bathrooms, and that's one of the things that League is really pushing, identifying what we have and having access. So,
And you said there's an issue with the code out here. Did the people?
that was just an example. We have a locked bathroom door in a public building on the ground floor, and the next closest bathroom is the 3rd floor. And if you're public, you don't necessarily get the code. And so we need access to public sanitation and public hygiene, and bathrooms are one of them. And League has been exploring that over the last year, and we found that we're getting fewer bathroom access, not more. So
Probably a solution to that would be good to come up with.
oh, yes, sir.
Okay,
Wholeheartedly.
all right. Maybe we can hear about that at the next meeting.
Yes, sir.
Okay, great. Veterans Initiative Work Group, Melissa.
So Lane County is part of a new veterans initiative. It's called Operation Welcome Home Campaign. We were one of 10 communities selected to receive technical assistance guidance from Oregon Housing and Community Services in partnership with Oregon Department of Veterans Services and the Cloudburst Group to end veterans homelessness. We started in early February. The work group consists of staff from Lane County, City of Eugene, Homes for Good, St. Vincent de Paul SSVF, sponsors, Eugene Mission, Housing Our Veterans, Veterans Legacy, Community Supported Shelters, Lane County Veterans Services, and then we recently reached out to representatives from Merkley, DeFazio, and Wyden's office. They joined us on Tuesday, and they're actually super excited and want to participate going forward. In our beginning in February, we determined 2 goals that we want to do in a year span. The first one is 100% utilization of existing VATCH vouchers and permanent supportive housing inventory. And the other one is increase the PSH and VASH turnover rate from 2% to 5% with move-on vouchers for participants who no longer need supportive services. We identified kind of 3 needs that we need to do that. The first one is the restructure of the veterans by name list and our coordinated entry system. We already started doing some modeling around the by name list and have kind of broke it apart and determined what's working and what's not working. So we are moving forward with already doing the restructuring on that. The other thing is to increase the VA's capacity or expansion of partner participation in order to utilize all the VASH vouchers. And the third one was to develop some kind of move-on case management system for clients leaving VASH units to other supportive housing options. So that work group is busy. We meet every 2 to 3 weeks.
Okay,
What we got going on?
so you got a lot going on.
A lot going on, yeah.
Any questions for Melissa? Well, I want to thank you, because that you have a lot of balls in the air, and I know we all appreciate the work you're doing to keep that committee, we don't drop any of those balls, I guess what I'm trying to say. So thank you very much. That's great. Anything else for her? Anything you want to add, Steve, or?
I just wanted to mention, it's on the agenda here that the Strategic Planning Committee will meet on April the 19th, and Alex will be staffing that with the Strategic Planning Committee. And at this point, the process will be looking at updating the strategic plan, anything that has changed during the course of the last year in our work that would need to be reflected in the strategic plan or changed in the strategic plan. And then the other piece is looking at the strategic plan with the lens of the TAC report, so that we can see where there is congruence in areas where maybe there's divergence, and be able to come back to the Poverty and Homelessness Board to have some discussions about updating that.
Great. Thanks, Steve. Any questions for Steve? If not, the next 2 items, Amanda is going to take us through first the continuum of care scores comparison, and then youth homeless demonstration program. So take it away, Amanda.
Gotta go to the emergency room.
Everyone hear me? Okay, so you have in your packet the continuum of care competition debriefing. This document basically summarizes our score from the previous competition. And you don't have the 2017 score in your packet, but I can go through a little bit of where we improved and where we kind of stayed the same.
So that's on page 9
Yes.
in the packet? Yeah. Page 9.
Page 9.
So overall, our score improved from last year. Last year's score was 136.25 points out of 200. This year it was 161.75, so we improved by about 25 points, which is promising. I will say last year's scoring across the board from other continuums and from ours, we felt like the scoring was fairly harsh last year. So I'm not sure if the scoring was different this year, but we did improve in a couple of areas. Scoring well this year in the project review ranking and selection process. We got 18 out of 18 points in that this year. The previous year we got 8 out of 18 points, and I think that speaks to our more robust evaluation process that we've put in place. We were able to attach an evaluation instrument that the RFP evaluation committee put together, and so we've made a lot of strides in that area. The other was really the system performance metrics, which are on the following page. We scored higher in certain areas, one of which was length of time homeless as reported in HDX. The others that I think could have areas for improvement include our successful permanent housing placement and retention, so how many people are placed into permanent housing and how long they stay there, as well as the returns to homelessness. We're still not scoring quite as high in those areas, and so we'll really be diving into our system performance measures, which will be submitted before the end of May, and this group will receive that document as well. The other area you'll see on the last part of this, the 4th page of it, you'll see we got 0 out of 10 points for the rapid rehousing beds as reported in the housing inventory chart. This is a bit of an odd question, and I've brought it to HUD as a concern of the way it's scored. It's pretty much based on our reported rapid rehousing beds in our housing inventory chart, which is based on a point-in-time number of who's in housing on that night. So it happens in conjunction with the point-in-time count. So there are people in rapid rehousing that are in the housing search process, and those would not count towards our rapid rehousing count on that night. So to me, it's a sort of arbitrary way to look at that. We happen to have less people in housing on that particular night when we submitted it the previous year, so we automatically did not receive those points. The numbers were 260 in 2017 and 216 in 2018, so a reduction of 44 beds, even though our inventory of rapid rehousing actually didn't decrease. So I don't think there's anything else there unless people have questions. We did have a debriefing call with HUD, and they noted that a few areas in order to score highly were to obviously reduce homelessness. So that's based on our point-in-time count number. COCs that use performance criteria when they're rating and ranking their projects, which we've really tried to up that in the last couple of years. The extent to which communities commit to a housing first approach, which I think we've really tried to do as much as we can, and then increasing permanent supportive housing and rapid rehousing units, obviously. So those are the areas that we'll really be focusing on. They have noted that our next notice of funding availability, NOFA, will come out in early May. So we're getting ready for that schedule coming up.
Chris?
Mr. Chair, Amanda, thank you for this. In regards to 4A5, where we got the 0, have other communities ran into the same problem? Has this affected us being placed lower in qualifications than, say, other people? And how did they overcome it?
I'm not sure about other continuums specifically on this question. I did bring it up on our debrief call with HUD, and they clarified that that is the way it's scored, and I sort of brought that as a concern, and we've also submitted a question to HUD about it, sort of asking why it's scored that way, but I'm not sure about in comparison to other continuums. I know some didn't receive points. Yeah.
Well, thank you.
Can you just go back for me? What is cross-cutting policies?
Where is that?
No, I'm just
Part
looking
four.
on page 12. It's part 4.
On the back.
Oh, okay. So those are the different sections of the COC application. What you have here in the score debriefing doesn't encompass everything. They only give us a score on some of the questions. The other ones are a
Okay.
mystery. So I'd have to go back and remember what was in that section. It looks like the only one they've included here is mainstream benefits, additional policies, as well as street outreach. So I think that section sort of covers a lot of different things. I would have to go back and see what else is in that section.
In data collection and quality, that looks like another, number 2 in that scoring summary is another area that we,
Yeah, these are their main parts of the application, but in each part, there's several different sections.
okay.
So I could always elaborate if you wanted more information about what's in each section, but they don't give us a score on each.
Okay. Well, I guess I'm curious about the 2 that there's the biggest gaps in. That, I mean, truthfully, and I'm just curious in terms of how we address those to get those, and I know you are too. I mean, I'm not being silly, but how does we get closer to 49 and closer to 22? And those are the only the 2 things that stick out. And then, anyway, so.
Yeah, I think when it comes up in the next process, we'll see what we can do in those particular
Okay.
sections. The questions change from year to year a little bit, but we can definitely look at
Okay.
our last years and see areas that we can improve in those parts specifically.
Great. Chris?
And would this be something that the HMIS committee would be looking at some point, or evaluation committee? Is this for us to help you?
Yeah, in terms of that, where the HMIS committee will come in that particular group is looking at our system performance measures, because that makes up the majority of our score. That impacts several different sections, and so that group will really dive in once we pull out that data and get ready to submit it to HUD and think about how we can improve strategies around those things.
Excellent. Well, thank you.
Any other questions for Amanda? If not, thank you. Oh, go ahead, Steve.
I'll just make a comment to put this in context. We reported this several months ago. We were successful in getting all of our renewal applications and we got some COLA adjustments from HUD in relationship to those. But we didn't get any of the new projects that we submitted. So part of it is that, when you look at this, we came in pretty close to the weighted mean score countrywide. And as Amanda was talking about the system performance measures, more of the application process is based upon performance. So the better you can perform at reducing lengths of homelessness, getting people back into housing, and other measures that they have as part of the plan, your community is rewarded by getting more resources. It's not based upon you have a greater need, you have more homeless people, so we're going to give you more money.
Yeah, no,
Makes
right.
sense. So what you're saying, when we look at the total COC score of 161.75, and the weighted mean score is 166, so we are below that.
We're right around the median score, yeah.
And our goal is to get above that 166 number, is what I hear you saying.
Right, yes.
That's the challenge, okay.
Yeah. Anyway, okay. Thanks. Amanda, youth homelessness demonstration program.
Yeah, so that's the next part. Actually, it's before that section in your packet. A few pages in. Just filling in for Alex here, giving an overview. The Youth Homelessness Demonstration Program, NOFA, was released recently. And so what we hope to do is apply for that opportunity. You might remember that we applied for it last year, but did not receive it. So there is a summary on the first page of kind of what the opportunity is. Up to 25 communities will be awarded, 8 of which will be rural. If you remember from last year, this is to apply to be a YHDP community. So they're selecting a few number of communities to sort of demonstrate promising practices around ending youth homelessness. So this is, I think, the third round of opportunities that they're awarding. The total is $75 million this time. The minimum award that we could get is $1 million, and then it goes up from there based on your population of youth and a formula that they use for that. And so we have a group that is planning to put together this application, which includes Lane County staff as well as our Youth Homelessness Work Group Committee and the Youth Action Council, as well as partners from Looking Glass and 15th Night are also on that planning group. And so that is already starting to be underway. And I guess what Alex was looking for in terms of today is just sort of a okay approval to move forward and apply on behalf of the continuum, and we will move forward with that. So this is due May 15th, so we have a pretty tight timeline to get that together. But the good news is that we have already submitted it last year, and so we're not starting from scratch, and so we can really work to improve our score over the last time. And you can see on the second page, Alex included the application score from last year, which we did score fairly highly, and there were a couple of areas, particularly in demonstrating need and using our data and evaluation capacity, and so those areas we'll really focus on in this application. One thing is that we did do an improved youth point-in-time count, and so hopefully that will help us better demonstrate the need than we were able to in the last application. So we're hoping for a good shot at it this time, honestly. Yeah.
Chris?
Mr. Chair, Amanda, are we doing this as all of Lane County? Are we doing this as Eugene, maybe Veneta? Or how are we defining this?
Good question. So last year we applied on behalf of Eugene Springfield, the metro area. You have to apply as either an urban, rural, or now suburban area. They've added the suburban distinction this year. That's new. And so there's some designation that you have to fit in terms of your population size. You can't sort of be both. And so I think ours would fit into the metro area. I'm not sure for this year that that's been decided yet, whether it would remain as Eugene Springfield or whether we would incorporate rural areas.
Right. Lacey, do you have any thoughts on that or anything you want to add? Okay, good. Any other questions for Amanda? I guess we need to vote on this, don't we?
That's what I was told, yeah.
Yeah.
I think just
Do we have
sort of
enough?
a stamp of approval for
Yeah, I
us to
think we
move
have enough.
forward.
I think we have
Quorum
a
of the executive committee.
quorum, we have a quorum of the executive, we do have a quorum of the executive committee.
4 out of 7. So
Yeah. Can I get a motion to,
I'll move that we present this as asked by staff.
you want to second it? Great. All in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Nope. It's great.
And we'll be bringing updates throughout the application process for anything else that needs to be approved.
Okay, great, thank you. All right, Steve Manila, you have the next 3 items. And you have 4 minutes to do them all.
Okay,
No? Okay. No.
It's over a minute an item, that's.
it's a challenge. So I'm going to pass out a couple of things to you, and the first one is a piece that was put together by Oregon Housing and Community Services that speaks to the Oregon Housing Community Services legislative agenda, which I think will be of interest to members of this committee. And while I'm passing out paper, I'll go ahead and pass this information out. And this has to do with our budget. So I was hoping that Commissioner Farr would be here for this conversation, and I know Chris is part of the committee, but the first thing we wanted to talk about was, you know, we're in the process of reviewing the strategic plan again, and also we want to have a discussion with the Poverty and Homelessness Board about the committee configuration going forward. And the example that has come up is if folks have talked to us about whether or not it would be advantageous to split apart the shelter work from the work on permanent supportive housing and have 2 separate committees working on each of those separately. Part of the deal is that, and Lucy's not here, or Mayor Venice isn't here either, but a lot of the meeting agenda for much of the year for the Shelter and Supportive Housing Committee is taken up by talking about shelter and also about emergent needs in the wintertime. And so that is the main topic under this item. And then it's also an opportunity, and I don't know if there are other thoughts about other committees or other things that staff should look at and bring back to the full board in regard to committee configuration. So.
Any thoughts for Steve? What thoughts on the splitting that one committee up?
As a member of some committees, I
All committees.
I would support the splitting of the 2, even though that would mean just another meeting, because at times that we need to talk about a lot of emergent need, we have planning permanent supportive housing deadlines, and at the time that we need to talk about shelter stuff, we're working on different things. And so I really think that would help our work and actually be more focused, especially as we take on the TAC and a bigger push towards housing. So I firmly support the separation, but I also at the pleasure of the chair.
Thank you. No, that's good. Any thoughts, Sean, on this?
I feel like it's maybe a little bit early for the conversation. If we're gonna go through and look at the strategic plan again, right? The committee structure is the thing that implements the strategic plan. So like, I think the conversation's good.
Yeah.
But maybe after we have the revisions to the strategic plan, and then we can ask holistically, how does this structure support us achieving these goals?
I would agree with you, because I think that if we're going to implement, if we anticipate implementing what comes out of the TAC meetings into our strategic plan, it may change a couple of, more than one committee configuration. So I would agree with that, though I understand what you're saying, Chris. I think if you just look at that one, it would make good sense to do. But I think that I'm kind of in your boat, in your camp too. So I don't know if Lacey or Dan, if there's anything you want to weigh in on this, or either way. Okay. You were going to say something?
I'd just like to maybe then put the onus back to staff to make sure that we have an opportunity for both, so that way we can
Okay.
fully carry that load. If we're not going to section off the work, because we do have the MLK project, we also have the shelter project, and they both have a lot of heavy lifting.
Right. So what do we,
Well, I think, I think this has been a good discussion. I do think that it makes sense to dovetail this discussion with the strategic plan, as Sean has mentioned, that, as the strategic planning committee and staff are working on updating the strategic plan, to keep an eye out for, how we're going to implement aspects of it, and to review our committees and see if we have, if we're organized correctly. So
okay.
I think that's a good plan.
Okay. So we'll put that on the table for the next meeting. We don't have to do anything procedurally here.
No,
Okay.
no. It's
All right.
more of a discussion item.
Good. And maybe, yeah, that's good. I'd also like to hear from some other board members as well. So I think that works well. So thanks, Steve. And then the HSD budget overview.
Yeah, well, why don't I start off? What I'm going to start off with is to talk about one of our main funding sources, and I handed out the information on the Oregon Housing and Community Services legislative agenda. And what this represents, it's a one-pager back and front, but what this represents is the governor's recommended budget, which invests over $200 million into various housing initiatives through the Oregon Housing and Community Services Department. And the first one that's on the list here is addressing children's homelessness. The governor's proposal is for $20.5 million. All of these that I'm going to mention, most of them are a part of Senate Bill 5512, which is, that's the appropriations bill. And that's before the Subcommittee on Transportation and Economic Development. And so they've had presentations this past week, and then they're asking for people to, if people want to submit testimony, testimony has to be submitted by March 27th at 3 p.m. So if you're representing an organization, or if you're representing yourself as an individual, it's an opportunity to provide testimony on these items. So the $20.5 million that the governor is recommending for reducing children's homelessness, that's currently not in the co-chair's budget, so that would be, that's in addition to the legislature's budget. The other one of interest to us, because we end up receiving the funding and allocated out, is the emergency housing account and the state homeless assistance program, which is $50 million. The LFO, the legislature's budget, and the co-chair's budget, it's $40 million. That's the same amount we received last biennium. So this would be a $10 million increase. So we would see Oh, we usually get about 10 to 12% of the statewide allocation of those dollars. So we would see another $500,000 to maybe 700,000 a year over the next 2-year period of the biennium.
And say more about how that then gets dispersed, the decision-making process for that.
I'll get into that when I give my budget presentation. So I'll talk, the next piece that I'm going to talk about is specifically about that, Dan, so I'll get to that. The other things that are on here are the LIFT housing program, and that's a housing bonding program that goes to the Subcommittee on Capital Construction. And again, those are the bonds that the state makes available for affordable housing, and specifically the LIFT funds have in the past primarily been used to develop family housing. And so that's $130 million. Those end up being bundled up along with the federal tax credits that the state allocates, the home dollars and other dollars, and dollars that the home dollars that the city of Eugene and Springfield have as part of the home consortium. A lot of the projects that go forward end up competing for those bonding dollars at the state. Another piece, I'm not going to go through all of these, but another piece that's in here that's very important to our work is preservation. Preserving, having the ability for homeowners or renters and for low-income housing projects to be able to remain available in the community is a big deal. The example of a big-time project that's going on right now that Stephanie Jennings has reported to this group on is Yapoa Terrace. And as you know, Homes for Good, the Housing Authority, has also been involved with a number of those projects. So those are the main pieces I wanted to mention. There's also on this backside here, we talk a lot in this committee about permanent supportive housing. That's housing for people who need low barrier, have mental illness, substance abuse, or have special needs where they need additional kind of service support. And there's a proposal for $50 million in bonding, and I believe these would be lottery bonds that would be, again, it goes through the Subcommittee on Capital Construction, that would be available, for permanent supportive housing. When we applied for our MLK Commons, the state hasn't had any program for permanent supportive housing. So myself and Karen Gaffney were part of a work group this past year with the state. And it was also Technical Assistance Collaborative TAC that was a part of it. And basically the way this would be programmed is a partnership between the Oregon Health Authority that has the Medicaid budget and Oregon Housing and Community Services. So the intent is for the first time for the state of Oregon to make available a program for communities where they would be able to apply for both the bonding resources to create the housing as well as the service resources through the Oregon Health Authority. So that's sort of the backdrop before I get into our specific budget issues. So does anybody have any questions about this?
Chris?
Steve, could you please talk to me a little bit about this negative 67% on the car camping program in Santa Clara, or is that budget?
Oh, I'm not there yet.
Okay.
We'll explain
Okay.
I'll go on to that handout in a second.
Okay. Sorry.
Any questions about this?
Questions for Steve?
Yeah,
If not,
okay. So the other handout that I gave you, I presented this information to the Human Services Commission this past week. And, basically starting off our Human Services Division budget, which is about proposed at about 18.7 million, it would be, the base budget is about $1.1 million less than it was this past year. And most of that is because we received a lot of one-time funding. I'll go through what some of those are. One of the pieces that we received was as you'll recall, during the short session, the governor had requested that the E-Board release an additional $5 million, and then we invested, it was close between $350,000 and $400,000 in the St. Vincent de Paul Family Access project, both on the capital side and operational side. So those dollars are not available to us. Also, we received, it was the beginning of a biennium, so what happened is we put together a budget, and then over time, we were able to add to some projects and reallocate funding. So that was another piece of why we're where we're at. So what you see on that list is that with receiving the same amount of state, county, and city revenue and our federal revenue, we're about $569,000 shy of being able to support everything that we had in programming this past year. And so I had a staff team that Amanda here was a part of, and she helped put together this piece. So Amanda, do you want to talk about the criteria you developed?
Sure, I can talk a little bit about that. It's pretty much on that page there, the first page of the handout. A group of our staff looked at this, and we looked at a variety of things in a way to hopefully be able to prioritize. Should we get less funding than we would need to fund everything, sort of similar to the ranking process that we do for continuum of care funding projects, but we looked at a little bit different criteria because the list of projects that you have there encompasses, like Steve said, some that were, added funds to existing contracts, some were brand new, and even within that, they're not all housing. There's some other projects mixed in there, and so it's sort of like comparing apples to oranges for some of them, and so it was pretty challenging to come up with consistent, fair, equitable criteria to really prioritize within them. And so the things that we looked at were project performance, so whether or not they met the outcomes that were outlined within their program plan and what would be expected of the project. We also looked at system priorities, so whether they served over 50% of a priority population, and that included FUSE households, youth, unaccompanied youth, families with children, chronically homeless households. So if they were serving more than 50% of one of those, they would have gotten additional points. We also looked at alignment with our strategic plans, and that included looking at whether or not the project fell under a priority that was outlined in the TAC report, the community needs assessment, and the PHB strategic plan. So we really looked at whether they met any priority or whether they met all three of those to sort of prioritize that way. And then finally, the fiscal and other factors, we did look at a few things. This didn't contribute usually to the overall score, but we did look at whether or not the funds were spent down, obviously, and that particular criteria may have impacted a score. And so if they returned funds or weren't able to spend down funds and we had to deallocate, then that actually would have given someone negative points. So Chris, that explains the the car camping one. That one started originally at around $40,000 and was reduced to just the one because it had some difficulty getting off the ground, if you remember. And so it lost points because it didn't score in any of the areas.
Because looking at that number, what we're asking
Yeah.
for the one-time allocation, we could put that family in a house for a year.
Yeah.
And it's a car camp outside in the UGB.
Right. So
That doesn't reflect our goals.
Yeah. Right, so we looked at, we also tried to kind of look at cost efficiency, so whether or not the funds could be better served or could be, get better outcomes in a different way if they were repurposed, and so that might not have contributed to the score, but that was part of the conversation that we had around some of these.
Thank you.
So, so this gets to Dan's earlier question. All the things on this list are supported with either the EHA or the SHAP funds, the state funding. And so, if we get what's in the governor's budget, we may end up eking through and having enough to be able to look at this list and then fund, much of what we had started. Also, we're in the third year of our RFP process, and next year we're going to be RFPing again. And so we have, when Lisa brings forward the needs assessment, we have our refined strategic plan. We can go back and look at how we RFP these funds in the future. So we're not planning on having a new RFP process. So basically, we're looking at funding projects that we have an existing contract on and can extend them for an additional year at this point.
You had earlier said that we were about $500,000 short, if I.
Well, 569.
And then you said we're looking at a potential increase in the state funding of maybe 700,000. So I'm just
5
wondering
to 7.
if those two line up.
If those two things line up, then it will, one of the I think the thing to look at here is, that we're not likely to give a recommendation to put money into the Santa Clara. That would be an example. So I think but the other thing I'd say, as part of this is that this was an exercise that staff did, and this is helpful in looking at criteria, but some of it, as Amanda said, is apples and oranges, because we're talking about different targets for different populations. And then we're talking about pieces that are parts of systems like the seasonal motel vouchers that are used to house families when as we know, this last winter the annex was full during those Egan nights, and so Catholic Community Services, who does that, they were able to raise funds and put up additional people in motels, and so we want that to be available. We have we supported 2 transitional housing programs that are in here for youth. One which was, again, the newly developed project that's out on Willamette Street that St. Vincent de Paul has with girls, and then also a project that Looking Glass has, and so those were significant additional investments in transitional housing for for homeless youth. So I guess what I would say is that if we come up, if for some reason we come up short, then you know, we will be bringing this forward to you again, and having a you know, I don't know, Amanda, would it be the evaluation committee that we would use to?
I'm not sure. I guess we could.
Yeah, but what we would need to do is we would need to have a process in place to, you know, to go through these. Some of the things that are high up on the list, like the diversion program, what we didn't do is we didn't go through and say, well, we're serving this many folks this year in the diversion program. These numbers also that she has in the descriptions, those are based upon what was in the contract. How many, the family diversion program, how many people were been served? Lisa, I think you might know that.
It's in the hundreds. I don't have it with me.
500 individuals, maybe over 100 households that have been served with that program. So we would go through there and say, well, we served 100 or 120 households. If we only served 75 households, and then we put money back into transitional housing for youth, or we would need to have a process to, you know, to do that.
Sean?
Okay, so I guess a couple of comments, because I know it sounds like it's very, very early on.
Yeah.
So I don't know that there's a lot we can say or do, but like, even if you look on the back page, there are critical programs that, you know, meet a lot of priorities we set forth from the community. With that being said, I'm going to offer two considerations. One of them is maybe we should be asking questions, even if money comes up, about people that would score 17% on, and say, okay, how do we address the issues? Because somebody's seen a gap there, right? We shouldn't just automatically not change anything and just drop all the dollars back in if they suddenly show up.
Right.
The other is just to be conscientious of the discussion around the TAC report, right? Like, you know, like, I don't know anything about these programs, but there's landlord engagement that's listed on there, right? And then we're going to turn around and have a conversation like, hey, we need to go find money for landlord engagement, right? So just to sort of balance those two things. But like, if we want a better performing system, right, really understanding where, you know, why people are scoring in that 17% range would probably be a good question to ask.
Do you want to try to address that a little bit? Because I think that some of these, some of the things that are on the list that were in the 17% don't necessarily fit the criteria of what you were using to score was part of the problem. And
Right. It was challenging, like I said, to look at it objectively and equitably without, you know, with having a lot of different things. The landlord engagement in particular was for a staffing cost. It doesn't have real outcomes. It doesn't have really anything that we could look at as far as a success. And I think it had a number of challenges. And so the only thing it really scored on was being a part of a TAC priority, and that's why it's scored that way. And so I think this wasn't meant to be looked at as just the only thing we would look at, and there would be more conversation around how to sort of repurpose some of these things or fund them in full, and there would, be more conversation around that. I think same thing with like safe parking and the overnight parking programs. Those were scored fairly low as far as the community needs assessment goes, and do have outcomes, but they generally, people stay in the parking program and don't have huge exits to permanent housing, and so that's the reason those are scoring a little bit lower. The winter warming coordinator is a fairly new addition, and so that was also for a staffing cost for Egan, but that was a recent addition, so there wasn't a ton to look at in terms of that. But I think that would be something we certainly know is needed. It would need to be more of a conversation, I think.
Chris?
Number one, thank you for the staff for making this. This highlights some stuff that I've been kind of thinking about, and as someone who's working with the TAC implementation, I wanted to highlight that housing counseling and landlord engagement was the lowest performer on this, and I think it really speaks to our community need, which is why it popped up on the TAC report. simply having money put into something, contracting something, doesn't mean that we're going to get the outcomes that we need. But I hope that this document maybe helps us look and say, what do we need to make Egan more higher scoring into our strategic plan, into what we are as a community actually trying to do. What about the seasonal parking? Because if we aren't contracting right to meet the outcomes, that's on us to an extent, right? Because if we say we put people out there where there's no services, and then we say we have to close this down because there's no services, that's ultimately on us if we approve that. So I would really hope that, as this was talking about prioritization, that we take it beyond just this 1 year and look at, are the car camping helping us? Are we losing more people from that program into more primitive camping, as has been demonstrated by some of the data? And how do we move forward as a community? Because I have concerns when I see 17 and 8%, even knowing the criteria about it, that those are some of our highest priorities with the TAC report. So just my thoughts. Again, our staff does awesome work, and I love how they can bring it to our attention in ways that we can actually reflect and go, hey, this is the metric and this is how we're here. All this stuff is doing great and we're going to continue to do this, but we have vet services, we have family services. Where are our services for our singles who don't qualify for the special gaps? That's the bulk of our homeless. And where's the rural stuff? So, thank you.
Thanks, Chris. Anything else?
So let me put this also into a broader context too. The other thing I want to mention that is part of the discussion piece with the Human Services Commission is that we go through this list and we have these priorities, but at the same time we have a number of things that we're contracting for that it's becoming more difficult for our subcontracting agencies to meet their outcomes and to carry out the programs because of increasing costs. Or another example would be the need to put in more staffing to ensure the safety of folks in a program. And then the other piece that we're looking at in the county and city budget process is looking at costs related to implementation of some of the things that are in the TAC report. So I just want to put it in context that this exercise of showing this gap with the state funding isn't the only piece that we're working on as part of the budget process. So we put together, as part of the county budget process, Steve Moker-Heisky asked that I put together an ad package for the implementation of the first year of the TAC report. And so we have an ad package in the county budget process of about $780,000. The other piece that we're working with the city of Eugene on is what people know as dusk to dawn to dawn, or new dawn, depending upon which version of it what you want to call it. We're also looking at both the city of Eugene and the county continuing to invest in that program, while we have a goal of maybe by 2021, the following budget year, having a public shelter operating. So that's another piece. And to give you some idea, we estimated, just generally doing the dawn to dawn program on the seasonal basis, and again, this was just doing an exercise of looking at some existing costs and not what we're doing, which is sitting down with Pete and his staff at St. Vincent de Paul and looking at all the details. That cost was around $900,000, to house 240 people and provide services to 300 people a day, at the Lendholm Center. So I just want to give you an idea that in order to meet some of our goals in our strategic plan, we're going to have to look at how we resource them and how we look at pieces of implementing the TAC report. Not only, as Chris has pointed out, a lot of focus in the TAC report was on individuals, but the sediment of the TAC report is really, looking at improving the services and the systems and the coordination for not only for singles, but for families, for youth, for everyone, so.
All right. Anything else for Steve on budget? All right, if not, let's move on to the TAC Implementation Steering Committee work. Steve Manel.
Yeah. I'll first apologize for Alex is out this month, and so I have lots of agenda items to share. So I just want to give you an update on where we're at with the implementation of the TAC report. Myself and Peter Chavin from the City of Eugene are the lead staff people from the city and the county working on the implementation of the TAC report. We've formed a steering committee, and the purpose of the steering committee is to provide advice to us. And the deliverable, the report that we need to deliver is on May the 13th to a joint meeting of the County Board of Commissioners and the City of Eugene City Council on the implementation of the TAC report, and specifically an action plan. So what we're doing is we're working with lead staff people in each of the 10 areas that are in the TAC report. And to remind people, those are expand and coordinate street outreach, expand diversion and rapid exit strategies, expand, coordinate rapid rehousing, 350 units of permanent supportive housing, work with the Homes for Good on move-on strategies, tenancy supports for, for people who are in housing who need those tenancy and service supports, making changes and improving our coordination, our coordinated entry system, working with landlords, ensuring that we're providing for the community and for all of our providers best practice training. And then the last of the 10 items is the 75-bed emergency shelter, or how many ever beds it gets decided upon. So what we're doing is we're working on I don't know the best way to say it is a project plan that's like a spreadsheet that rolls out into a chart that will show over time, these are the things that these are the actions that we need to take, or the tasks that we need to complete over the next 3 years. So that's what we're working on, that will be presented to, and we'll be getting advice from the steering committee on, and then presenting to the joint elected official meeting in May. And the people from this, from the PHB who were on the steering committee are Pat Walsh and Chris McAllister. And then from the City of Eugene, Council Person Claire Surrett and Mayor Venice, Pat Farr, and Heather Buck. And then Steve Moker-Heisky and John Reese are also on the steering committee. So we have the administrators involved with the steering committee. So when we complete this work, I think the next step will be between May and the end of the fiscal year, to really start putting together the plans and the resources for implementation of the year one. So I think what will happen eventually is we'll see that what we have as a TAC report will be sort of put together as a system transformation and increasing our capacity, and what the TAC report didn't do is the TAC report didn't say, didn't give us any guide to how we would phase this in. And I think what we'll end up with when we have a plan is that you'll be able to see what we think we can accomplish over time, towards the goal of the plan, which is, anyone who wants to be inside or sheltered or housed has an opportunity to be housed. So.
A couple of questions. At this point, it sounds like you're trying to address the whole thing. I mean, or is there any order that, like, we're going to focus on this portion before that portion?
Well, that's what these task groups are going to work on, because when you think about it, for example, integral to this plan is the creation of 350 units of housing, the shelter, those physical capacities. But, the other thing that we know from the TAC report is that some of the improvements around restructuring and doing better with what we have, and better coordination of the system, are pieces that we need to start working on immediately, so that we get some of the results with some of the efficiencies and some of the quality improvements that are recommended in the TAC report. So we probably, that's the kind of stuff that we'd probably start off with. The other thing that I think is really important is the discussion about best practice training. So you don't want to implement something, before people have a clear opportunity. And the way it ends up getting actualized, in the field is that, when we contract for services, we need the executive directors of the provider agencies, we need the managers and supervisors at those agencies, and the line staff, all sort of in alignment in order to make this work. And it is a big system, and there are a lot of agencies and people involved. So that's the kind of stuff that we can launch. The other piece that people are really keen about is when we should start focusing more on having more diversion, and also more housing navigation and helping people get into housing. So some of those pieces as well. So what you may see is the kind of plan where the TAC report may say, well, you need 6 people to do this, or you need 5 people, or you need 8 people. And so we may say, in year one, in January 2020, 6 months into the fiscal year, we'll add these, and we'll have all of our training and everything in line, and get some of the coordination pieces done during the first 6 months,
And
stuff like that.
So I, for one, am very thrilled with the comprehensive nature of the TAC report, that it is so broad and it has all these things that for us to be working on. My concern is related to the shelter piece, number 10, and I'm just wondering, first of all, is our shelter committee going to continue to take the lead on that, or who's taking the lead on that, or is it just going to be within the city? And whether or not this whole thing is, I'm concerned about that it takes us so long to do the work on the implementation of this report. Is that going to delay progress on implementation of the public shelter?
I would say no. I know that, the only example that I can give you is that I know that in discussions with the county administrator would like to see us have a public shelter operating. I think I mentioned this earlier in 2021.
And so is that going to remain within our committee?
Well, the other piece is we're going to need the committees that we have with the PHB to help advise the process. So when we start working with an architect, when we start working with sites, when we start looking at providers and those sorts of things, as an advisory group, those things will be brought to the shelter committee.
I think the short answer is that yes, and the details of what our group, of the shelter committee is going to do, I think is yet to be determined. But my inclination in terms of my involvement in this is to not reinvent the wheel anywhere, but is to use the teams and resources that are
Right,
looking
yeah,
at
and I
it.
hope so, because they've already done some work. I just
Yeah,
wanted
they've
to be
done
clear
work.
that.
Yeah, so
Be sure
that's where we
we're
are.
clear on understanding who's going to be responsible for what, and that work is going to proceed and not be waiting until something else finishes before we can.
No,
get
I
going.
don't, to me, this is not an opportunity to stand pat and wait.
Right,
It's to keep
Yeah,
moving forward and then to work, to take whatever I'm sorry, Steve, but take whatever the tax got going and implement that. I mean, fold that into what we're doing and what other people are doing in a coordinated manner. So,
And even 2021,
so short,
well, I know public
Sure, right,
processes are just slow and take,
Yeah.
and we all know the need is immediate, and it's just frustrating that it takes us so long to do these things.
yeah, I understand. Chris?
Thank you, Steve, for this and for the update. I am on the implementation steering committee, and I want to reaffirm something that both leagues said when the TAC firm came, is that if we're providing services for people, we have to have the people who are receiving those services part of the process, part of the fix. And so with League, one of our recommendations was don't just let us be the voice of the homeless when you guys are doing this report. We asked them to go out, talk to Ward 9, talk to the homeless work group, talk to the people along the river, and they didn't have time to do that. And so while we're doing our implementation, especially with the shelter and some of the rapid rehousing items, can you please have staff look at focus groups, look at ways to engage this community? Because while I'm proud to represent our works, I am not the one voice of homelessness, and there are different ways to do this. I do not have needs, I do not have the barriers that other people in our community have, and neither does League, because we are only made up of 8 people. There are over 1,600 unsheltered. We really need them to be not influencing what has already been built for us. We were brought into the MLK Commons building, but we were able to look at it after they already came up with the designs. If you want people to be involved in the programs, at least get some of their feedback from the very beginning. And that's my only concern regarding the shelter on that portion of the TAC plan. So more on how the voice is to talk about every step of the way.
Yeah, I think that that's important, and then also I know that since you're on the steering committee, you'll have an opportunity to voice that
Yes, sir.
as part of looking at what we come up with. So I think, that's the other piece of this is how consumers and how people with lived experience are involved. I mentioned before how we engage our providers and their staff. There are a lot of people that need to be involved and consult to make this work. And at the same time, to Dan's piece, we need to look at how we can do things expeditiously so that the things that we can do more rapidly,
Right.
that we don't create process barriers
Yes.
that are going to prolong the, and part of the thing in looking at the plan is like with a shelter or with housing, you have land use, you have siting, you have site preparation, you have lots of processes already that require a lot of time.
Thank you.
All right, thanks. All right. Well, if there's not anything else, we're going to move into public comment, but before we do, I want to congratulate Chris. Chris was honored by the United Way for all of his hard work on behalf of the homeless community and through his work through the Poverty and Homelessness Board and the other 20 or 30 things that I know you're involved in each week. So I just want to recognize Chris for his hard work.
Yay.
Thanks. Okay. If you haven't signed up yet, we've got one person that's four people have signed up to speak. So, so Heather, are you here? Did she just leave? Okay. From Whitebird. Diana. You want to come up to this blue chair right here? This would be great. This blue chair, right, the empty one right there.
I sit down?
Yeah.
Okay. First of all, thank you for letting me have a voice here. I'm here to speak about a preservation issue that I just found out about. There are many, many units of housing that are now being converted to tourist units, and it's all over Lane County. I talked to someone in Mackenzie River. There's almost no rental housing available anymore because it's all been converted. I know where I live in a single-family neighborhood, house next door, just single-family home, just became permanent Airbnb. And while it's good that we're talking about all these other ways to make sure people are housed, we have to really preserve the housing we have. It's an ecosystem. I don't know if I said that right. And so every housing unit then becomes an endangered housing resource that is precious. And so what I want to ask you is to either work on passing a moratorium or permanent regulations. I have done the research and written up already a proposed moratorium. If you'd like to see it, I can bring it to you. I also have done a lot of research on best practices and can share that with you. So anything that you would like, I would be glad to help you with.
Great. Well, thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thomas Price.
Good afternoon again. I am, I think my city colleague is left, but here not as a sustainability commissioner, but I would like to talk to you about 4 things, and one is the Sustainability Commission. I think I'll.
Just so you know, you've got 3 minutes.
I know.
Okay.
So I preface that because I know that I don't have much time. Winter weather, disaster response and recovery, and LTDs play into that, and social equity around transportation. Vets becoming homeless through a process of them getting kicked out of services here locally, sent to the ER, and basically not allowed back into the services, and animal equity within these 4 topics. I have lots more to talk to you about. Because of the lack of time, I doubt I'll get to any of these stories or things, but I wear many hats other than Eugene's Sustainability Commissioner hat. Social equity is the reason I'm here as a liaison. There is much that we could do to help you, as well as I can help you personally on many of these levels, and there's conversations to be had.
You've got 2 minutes, but if you can get to a couple of them.
Yeah, well, basically, this whole social equity aspect, things like the way we responded to the disaster, even from transporting people, getting them to shelters. I'm with the COAD, and we didn't open up, we opened bus right-of-ways with auto in mind, and there's a kind of interesting conundrum there. We can't get people on the buses to shelters, but we can move a few autos down lanes. And the LTD is actually one that's asked me to start asking other groups to pay attention to this, because we can actually move more people through the bus system if we open our bus routes for buses and not for autos first. There's a big equity thing with animals and homelessness, and people getting kicked out of homelessness, even camping things, because they have animals. It's one of the last things that they hold on to keep their dignity, yet it becomes a barrier. Unfortunately, some of our people that I should be talking with or have left the room already. There are a local vet, or actually a local mother of a vet, who's been traveling in her RV to get her son's services, went to Portland from their original home, got them services down here for the federal government will pay $10,000 a month for him to be housed, but because he needs special extra care, they would have to hire an extra person to deal with him. They're actually outsourcing him to the hospital and not allowing him back into the, so that mother is basically in an RV, tentatively homeless. Now he's back on the streets, and these systems continue to perpetuate the homelessness. So there's bigger dives we need to take into some of these systems to prevent many of the issues you're dealing with.
Thanks, Thomas. Majeska.
Majeska C. Screen. First of all, I just want to say how much I appreciate that your meetings are webcast now. I almost didn't come in because I could have just stayed home and watched it, but and I really appreciate that and want to encourage a lot more people to take advantage of being familiar with what good work is going on here. I just want to put in a reminder as you're approaching the work on the strategic plan to remember to include in the process enough opportunities for public engagement from the beginning of that process. Thanks a lot.
Thank you, Majeska. Is there anybody that signed up that didn't get a chance to sign up? Yeah, come on. I didn't get a chance. That's all right. I was late. That's all right. We've good. Right.
Hi, my name's Lori Hauber, and I guess I appreciate the comments Chris has made, Steve, you made, Jessica's just made about public engagement and specifically involving the unhoused. So I want to reiterate support for that. One thought that's been discussed at the subcommittee of the Human Rights Commission, the Poverty and Homelessness Subcommittee, is forming some form of an advisory group that could provide input and have a formal mechanism to provide input to the TAC Implementation Steering Committee as a way to ensure that it's not just input gotten on an ad hoc basis, but broader representation, as Chris said, about being able to provide that input and ensure that it's kind of obtained in an organized way. So that's all I have to say. And I'm not here as a plant for Chris. He didn't know I was even saying this.
Thank you. All right, anything else? Okay. Come on up, Wayne.
I'm Jerry Smith, a retired social worker. As a professional and as a volunteer, I've been at this for about 54 years. And I've got to say, the situation now is awful. It's not even close. Every agency of these good agencies have waiting lists, are short-staffed. The senior advocacy agencies don't allow them to do housing because the situation is so bad. They'll help them in maybe mental health or other kind of emergencies, although mental health has gone into just a nosedive. It's just so awful. And I've got to say, I'm concerned about something that looks good. I really want there to be prison reform. But if we start putting people into the community with no income, we're already doing that. We have backed away from welfare. My wife says, don't ever use that word. People hate it. Well, it's crazy to hate it. if you don't provide welfare, you provide homelessness. And we're providing homelessness in an overwhelming number. I volunteer at First Christian Church for just drop-in people. We're not particularly designated as a place to come for homelessness. I'm finding people that are coming in for the very first time since they were beaten by their spouse, and Women's Space doesn't have any place for them to go. I'm finding people who are so disabled that they are having a hard time applying for disability, and the numbers are just increasing, and it concerns me a lot, and that's all I've got to say. I wish I could be positive, but right now I think things are awful. The fact that we can't house people who need to be housed, even under a tarp or a tent, is just crazy.
Thank you, Jerry.
The richest country in the world is a joke.
Thank you, Jerry. Okay, anything else? Any thoughts from the committee, from the board? If not, I'm going to wrap this up. I want to thank everybody for being here today. I also particularly want to thank the staff, Amanda and Melissa, Lisa and Steve. You guys do incredible work, and Diane, who's signaling to me to be sure to take home one of these. No?
The decision.
Oh. Yes.
I may not look like that.
Yeah, you're.
So the Bascom pipe is not available at the regular time for the all-nighter. We can
Okay.
either bump up the time to meet at the Bascom Pipes in the Virgin Public Library, 11 to 12:30, or if we must meet at 12 to 1:30, we'll have to probably be in the server room.
My thought is to let's make sure we keep it open to everybody and that we do it, we bump it up an hour. What do you think, Sean? Work for you? Lacey? Okay. Chris?
Only other consideration maybe is to ask the general meeting, because it is a general meeting, and some people might not be able to do 11.
Yeah, well, I think we're going to make they're asking us to make a decision, so I think we're going to need to do that. So let's do that at 11. Yeah, no, I appreciate what you're saying. I get it. But I think we have consensus here that we'll do that at 11 o'clock. And if we get a lot of pushback from the general membership, we'll push it out. I want to be sensitive to the transparency part of this. So, yeah. Okay. A couple things that we're going to do. Steve is going to keep us apprised on the tax steering committee and the work that's going on there, as well as the budget. We're going to talk about committee configuration at next meeting or a meeting after that. I want to thank Amanda.
After the strategic.
After the strategic plan. I want to thank the team here for all the hard work that they're doing here, Amanda and Melissa. With that, I think I'm going to close the meeting. Thank you.